The city was alive with its usual symphony, honking cars, chatter, and the distant wail of sirens. For Alex Carter, it was just another Tuesday. He sat in his small apartment, scrolling through news headlines, sipping on a lukewarm cup of coffee. The news had been strange lately, reports of violent outbreaks, emergency lockdowns, unexplained attacks. But Alex, like most people, dismissed it. The world always had some new crisis. Then, the power cut out. The room fell into an eerie silence. The dull hum of the fridge stopped, the streetlights outside flickered off, and even the Wi-Fi went dead. Annoyed, Alex grabbed his phone, but before he could check for updates, a sound from the street below made his breath hitch. A scream. Not the kind of scream you hear from a fight or an accident, this was primal, raw terror. Then another. And another. Alex rushed to the window. His apartment overlooked the busy streets of downtown, but what he saw made his stomach lurch. People were running, stumbling, colliding, fleeing from something. A woman tripped and fell, her cries for help drowned out by the chaos. Then, something lunged at her. A man. No, not a man. His movements were jerky, unnatural. His mouth latched onto her neck, and suddenly, she was screaming for a different reason. Blood sprayed onto the pavement as the thing tore into her flesh. Alex stumbled backward, knocking over his chair. His mind raced. This had to be a riot, some kind of violent protest, maybe even a drug-fueled attack. But deep down, he knew this was something else. Something worse. His hands trembled as he reached for his phone, but there was no signal. The emergency alert system had failed. That never happened. A pounding noise shook his door. Alex. Open up. It was his neighbor, Eric. His voice was frantic. Without thinking, Alex unbolted the door, and Eric practically fell inside, gasping for breath. They're eating people, man. It's like some freaking horror movie. Eric stammered, locking the door behind him. What the hell is going on? Alex demanded, his own voice unsteady. Eric's face was pale. I don't know, but we need to get out of here. Fast. More screams echoed through the building. Heavy footsteps thundered in the hallway, followed by a guttural growl. The door rattled as something slammed into it. Alex grabbed a kitchen knife, his heart pounding. The fire escape. Eric nodded, and they rushed toward the window. Below, the streets were filled with people running for their lives, but the undead were faster, hungrier. Cars crashed, bodies lay in the road, some still twitching, others being devoured. Alex swallowed the bile rising in his throat. We have to go now, Eric whispered. As Alex climbed onto the fire escape, he realized this wasn't just an outbreak. This was the end of the world. The metal steps of the fire escape groaned under Alex's weight as he climbed down, his fingers slick with sweat. Below him, Eric moved quickly, his eyes darting between the alleyway and the chaos in the streets. The city was unrecognizable. Horns blared from abandoned cars, smoke curled into the sky from distant fires, and the screams, they never stopped. Alex swallowed hard. He'd seen riots before, but this was different. The people attacking weren't just violent. They were mindless, relentless. We need to find a car, Eric said, his voice tight. Alex nodded, but he knew the truth. The streets were a death trap. The second they stepped onto the pavement, they'd be surrounded. The alley wasn't much better, trash bins knocked over, the stench of rotting food mixing with something far worse. Then, a sound made them freeze. A soft shuffling. A low growl. Alex turned his head slowly. At the end of the alley, a figure emerged from behind a dumpster. A man, no, what used to be a man. His face was a ruined mess of blood and torn flesh. His mouth hung open, dark liquid dripping from his chin. Eric cursed under his breath. We gotta move. But as they turned, more movement. Two more staggered from the shadows, their lifeless eyes locking onto them. We're trapped, Alex muttered, gripping his knife tighter. Eric scanned the alley. There. He pointed to a metal door, an emergency exit to an old convenience store. Without thinking, they sprinted for it. The undead reacted instantly. They let out an inhuman screech and lunged. Eric reached the door first, yanking the handle. Locked. Move. Alex shoved him aside and rammed his shoulder against it. The wood groaned but didn't budge. The creatures closed in, arms outstretched, their rotting fingers inches away. Desperate, Eric grabbed a nearby brick and smashed the door's push bar. With a loud crack, it gave way, and they tumbled inside, slamming the door shut just as the first undead threw itself against it. They fell into darkness, gasping. For a moment, all they heard was the furious pounding on the door. Then, a voice. "Who the hell are you?" A flashlight clicked on, blinding them. Alex blinked rapidly as the silhouette of a man came into focus. He was older, mid-40s maybe, wearing a torn jacket and gripping a crowbar like he meant to use it. "We're not infected," Alex said quickly, raising his hands. The man didn't lower his weapon. "That's what the last guy said." He turned 10 minutes later. Eric scoffed. "So what? You're just gonna kill us?" The man's eyes flickered with something unreadable. He didn't answer. Alex's stomach twisted. The undead weren't the only danger anymore. To be continued. Alex's breath was shallow as he stared down the cold glint of the crowbar. The stranger holding it was tall and wiry, his face hardened by survival. Behind him, the dimly lit convenience store stretched into shadow, its shelves half-looted. "I asked you a question," the man said, his voice low but firm. "Who are you?" Alex raised his hands slightly. "My name's Alex. This is Eric. We're just trying to get somewhere safe." The man studied them for a moment before lowering his weapon, just a little. "Safe doesn't exist anymore." Eric wiped the sweat from his brow. "Yeah, we kind of figured that out." The pounding on the door hadn't stopped. The undead outside slammed against it, their nails scratching hungrily at the wood. The door wouldn't hold forever. The man sighed and gestured for them to follow. "Come on. If you were bit, I'll kill you quick. If not, we'll see." Alex and Eric exchanged a look but followed him deeper into the store. They passed the empty aisles, discarded food wrappers, shattered glass, the stink of something rotten. At the back of the store, they found a small stockroom. A single lantern flickered inside. A woman sat on the floor, cradling a little girl no older than 7. "This is my sister, Dana," the man said. "And my niece, Katie." Dana's eyes were wary, but she nodded at them. "You brought more mouths to feed, Scott?" Scott exhaled. "We don't leave people to die." Eric gestured to the shelves. "There's gotta be food here, right?" Dana shook her head. "Most of it was taken days ago. We've been rationing." Alex scanned the room. "How long have you been here?" "Since it started," Scott answered. "Barricaded ourselves in. Figured it'd blow over." He scoffed. It didn't. A sudden, loud crack made them all jump. The door. The pounding from the undead had grown more violent. The wood splintered, the push bar rattling. "They're getting through," Dana whispered, gripping Katie tighter. Alex's mind raced. "Is there another way out?" Scott pointed. "Emergency exit, but it leads to the main street. It's crawling out there." Another crack. The groaning of wood under pressure. No time. Alex looked around and spotted a row of shelves. "We push these against the door, buy ourselves time." Eric nodded. "Let's do it." They worked fast, shoving shelves against the breaking door, piling anything heavy on top. The undead outside screeched in frustration. Then, an ear-piercing shriek filled the room. Katie. She was staring at the back of the room, where a figure lurched out of the shadows, a man with bloodied clothes and vacant, sunken eyes. A zombie. He must have been hiding here the whole time, waiting, starving. And now, he had fresh prey. The room exploded into chaos. Scott swung his crowbar, but the creature was fast. It lunged at Dana, jaws snapping. She screamed, falling backward, barely dodging its bite. Eric grabbed a metal pipe from the floor and smashed it against the zombie's head. It barely flinched. Alex didn't think. He drove his knife forward, sinking it into the thing's temple. A sickening squelch. The creature shuddered, then collapsed. Silence. Everyone stood there, panting, the air thick with fear. Katie whimpered, burying her face into Dana's chest. Scott exhaled and looked at Alex. For the first time, his expression softened. "You saved us." Before Alex could respond, bang. The barricade at the front shattered. The dead were coming in. Scott grabbed his niece. "We run. Now. No more time. No more planning. Just survival." The barricade gave way with a deafening crash. A flood of decayed bodies poured into the store, their hollow eyes locking onto fresh prey. "Go!" Scott roared, gripping Katie tightly as he sprinted toward the emergency exit. Dana, Alex, and Eric followed, their feet pounding against the tiled floor. The undead lunged, their broken fingers reaching, their guttural groans filling the air. Alex barely dodged a grasping hand as he threw his shoulder into the emergency exit. The door burst open, flooding the room with daylight. Outside, the city was still burning. Smoke billowed from distant buildings, and the streets were a battlefield of the dead and the dying. But there was no time to process the horror, only to move. Scott led the way, cutting down a narrow alley. The group followed, pushing deeper into the city. Behind them, the undead spilled from the store, their snarls growing more distant. After several blocks, they stopped in an abandoned parking lot, gasping for breath. "Where now?" Eric asked, sweat dripping down his face. Scott wiped his brow. "There's a safe house. A few blocks from here. We've got weapons, food." Alex hesitated. "You sure it's still safe?" Scott's jaw tightened. "We don't have a choice." The group pressed on, weaving through the ruins of the city. Bodies lined the streets, some half-eaten, others still twitching. The air was thick with the stench of decay. Finally, they reached an old office building, its windows boarded up. Scott rapped a specific pattern on the door. Silence. Then, click. The door creaked open, revealing a man with a rifle aimed directly at Scott's chest. "Back already?" The man sneered. "And you brought guests?" Scott raised his hands. "It's me, Logan. Let us in." Logan's eyes flickered to Alex, Eric, and Dana. His grip on the rifle didn't loosen. "We barely have enough supplies for ourselves," Logan muttered. Alex's stomach tightened. He knew that look. Logan wasn't just being cautious. He didn't want more survivors. Dana stepped forward, holding Katie close. "Please. She's just a kid." For a moment, Logan wavered. Then he sighed and stepped aside. "Fine. But if anyone slows us down, they're out." The group hurried inside. The air was stale, the scent of unwashed bodies lingering. Several other survivors sat around, some cleaning weapons, others staring at the floor. Scott led them to a back room. "We'll rest here. But keep your guard up." Alex exchanged a glance with Eric. This place was better than nothing, but something felt off. As the door shut behind them, one thought echoed in Alex's mind. They had escaped the dead. But the living might be just as dangerous. To be continued. The safe house felt anything but safe. The air was thick with unspoken tension. The room was dimly lit, its only source of light a flickering candle in the corner. Alex's instincts screamed at him. Logan and his group were not to be trusted. Scott sat beside Dana and Katie, his eyes flicking between the other survivors. There were 5 of them: Logan, a stocky man named Reed, a woman with sharp eyes called Becca, and 2 others who barely spoke. Alex leaned toward Eric and whispered, "Something's off about these guys." Eric nodded. Yeah. They act like they own this place. Scott must have overheard because he muttered, "They do own this place. We're guests. And if we're not careful, we'll end up outside with the dead." As if on cue, Logan strode into the room, his rifle slung over his shoulder. "All right, listen up," he announced, his tone sharp. "We don't have room for freeloaders. If you're staying, you work. That means scouting, supply runs, or keeping watch. You pull your weight, or you leave." Alex folded his arms. "Leave and go where? Into a city full of zombies?" Logan smirked. "That's not my problem." Eric scoffed. "Great hospitality." Becca, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "It's the only way this works. We're not running a charity. Everyone does their part." Dana tightened her grip on Katie, looking uneasy. Scott nodded slowly. "Fine. We'll do our part." Logan grinned. "Good. You, me, and Becca go on a supply run at first light." He turned to Eric. "You're on guard duty." Eric muttered, "Lucky me." As Logan and Becca left, Alex leaned in toward Scott. "Are you sure about this?" Scott's jaw clenched. "No. But we don't have another choice." The next morning, the city was eerily quiet as Alex, Scott, Logan, and Becca crept through the ruined streets. The early morning fog curled around burnt-out cars and shattered windows. Logan led them toward an old pharmacy. "In and out," he instructed. "We grab what we can and don't take risks." Alex wasn't sure Logan cared about their safety. He seemed more concerned about getting what he wanted. They entered the pharmacy cautiously. Inside, the shelves were mostly stripped, but a few supplies remained. Scott stuffed a backpack with medicine. "This is good. Painkillers, antibiotics." A loud crash cut him off. Alex spun around. Becca had knocked over a shelf. A long, guttural moan echoed from the back of the store. Logan swore under his breath. "We need to move." Too late. A figure emerged from the darkness, then another. And another. Alex's pulse spiked. Zombies. Dozens. Logan turned and bolted. "Get what you can and run." Alex gritted his teeth. Logan had no intention of fighting. Becca fired her pistol, dropping the first zombie, but the gunshot only drew more. Scott grabbed Alex's arm. "We need to go. Now." Alex hesitated, then grabbed a backpack and ran. As they burst into the street, Logan was already sprinting back toward the safe house, leaving them behind. Typical. The horde poured from the pharmacy, the undead flooding into the streets. Becca was lagging behind. "Wait," she cried out. Alex turned just in time to see a zombie tackle her. She screamed as she went down. Scott yanked Alex's arm. "We can't help her." Alex clenched his jaw and forced himself to run. Behind them, Becca's screams were drowned out by the hungry growls of the dead. When they finally reached the safe house, Logan was already inside, shutting the door. Alex barely made it through before it slammed shut. Becca wasn't so lucky. She was still outside, pounding on the door. "Let me in." Logan shook his head. "She's bitten. Can't risk it." Scott's face twisted in anger. "You don't know that." Logan didn't care. He turned his back. The pounding grew weaker, then stopped. Silence. Alex felt sick. In a world overrun by monsters, the real danger wasn't just the undead. It was the people still alive. The silence after Becca's screams faded was heavier than the air in the safe house. Everyone stood frozen, the only sound the distant groans of the undead outside. Scott's fists were clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. "You left her out there," he growled at Logan. Logan shrugged, completely unmoved. "She was too slow. We don't open the door for the bitten." "You didn't even check if she was bitten." Scott roared, stepping forward. Logan didn't flinch. He simply raised his rifle a little higher. "You want to be next, Scott?" The room went dead quiet. Alex grabbed Scott's shoulder. "Not now," he whispered. "We need to be smart." Scott took a deep breath, forcing himself to step back. But the fire in his eyes didn't die. Dana, who had been clutching Katie the entire time, finally spoke. "We can't stay here." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of truth. Logan snorted. "Yeah? And go where?" Alex glanced at the boarded-up windows. "Anywhere but here." The way Logan and his group operated was clear now. They weren't survivors. They were scavengers, willing to let people die if it meant saving their own skin. Eric sighed. "So we wait for them to decide we're dead weight?" "No thanks." Logan smirked. "Then leave. But if you do, don't come back." Scott looked at Dana and Katie, then at Alex and Eric. "We'll find our own way." Logan waved a hand. "Good luck with that." The escape plan. The group huddled in the back room later that night. Eric leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "So, how do we get out without Logan putting a bullet in us?" Scott rubbed his chin. "We wait until they're distracted. They do a weapons check every night. That's when we go." Alex nodded. "What about supplies?" Dana bit her lip. "I've been hiding a few things. Some water, protein bars. It's not much, but it'll help." It wasn't perfect, but it was a plan. All they had to do was survive the night. The betrayal. The hours crawled by. Then, shouting. Alex jolted awake. He wasn't sure how long he had dozed off, but the yelling from the main hall was unmistakable. Scott crept toward the door and cracked it open. Logan and Reed were arguing. "We're running low," Reed grumbled. "We need more supplies." Logan scoffed. "Then we take theirs." Alex's stomach dropped. Reed smirked. "The kid, the woman, and the little girl. They're weak. Get rid of them, and we keep what they got." Dana sucked in a sharp breath. Katie, half asleep, whimpered. Scott's eyes darkened. "We move. Now." Eric didn't argue. They grabbed their supplies and crept toward the back exit. Footsteps pounded toward them. "Hey!" Logan's voice. Alex shoved the door open. "Run!" Scott scooped up Katie, Dana close behind him. Bullets cracked through the night. Logan was shooting at them. Alex ducked behind a dumpster as a bullet ricocheted off the metal. Eric returned fire, forcing Logan and Reed to take cover. "Keep moving." The group sprinted through the alley, dodging debris and weaving through the ruined streets. They didn't stop until the safe house was far behind. Until Logan and his gang were just another danger they had left in the past. For now. Breathing hard, Alex looked at the small, exhausted group. They had no shelter. No real supplies. But at least they still had each other. And in a world like this, that was the only thing worth fighting for. To be continued. The city was a graveyard. Alex, Scott, Dana, Eric, and little Katie had escaped Logan's so-called safe house, but now they were out in the open, vulnerable to both the living and the dead. They moved cautiously through the ruins, keeping low, their breath shallow. Scott carried Katie in his arms. She was exhausted, her tiny fingers gripping his shirt as if letting go would mean losing him forever. Dana looked around nervously. "Where do we go now?" Alex scanned the crumbling skyline. "We need shelter. Somewhere defensible." Eric sighed. Easier said than done. They crept down a narrow alley, stepping over broken glass and rotting bodies. The city's silence was its own kind of horror. No car engines. No distant voices. Just the occasional moan of the undead drifting through the ruins. Then, a scream. Not a zombie's groan. A human scream. The group froze. A few blocks away, someone was in trouble. Scott shifted Katie in his arms. "We can't help them," he said grimly. Dana looked torn. "But..." "No," Alex cut in. "We barely survived Logan. If we run into more people, we could be walking into another trap." Another scream. This one more desperate. Then gunfire. Whoever it was, there wouldn't be much left of them soon. Eric exhaled. "Let's go. Before we become the ones screaming." A false refuge. After another hour of walking, they found an old fire station on the outskirts of the city. It was abandoned. Scott tested the doors. Locked. Eric picked up a rock and smashed the glass window. Not anymore. The inside smelled of dust and mildew. The fire trucks were long gone, but there were still supplies, emergency kits, canned food, even bottled water. Dana grabbed a pack of medical supplies. Finally, some luck. Scott set Katie down on an old couch. "We'll stay the night." But no fires. No noise. Alex and Eric checked the second floor, securing doors and windows. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than nothing. For the first time in days, it felt like they could breathe. Then, a knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the front door. The group went still. The knocks came again. Then a voice. "I know you're in there." Alex's blood ran cold. It was Logan. The final stand. Scott grabbed his gun, eyes blazing. "How the hell did he find us?" Eric peeked through a crack in the boarded-up window. "He's not alone." Alex's stomach churned. Logan had brought Reed and 2 other armed men. "Open the door," Logan called. "Let's talk." Alex glanced at Scott. "We both know he's not here to talk." Scott's jaw clenched. "Then we make sure he never talks again." Dana gripped Katie, whispering in her ear to stay quiet. Outside, Logan's patience was wearing thin. "All right," he said, voice mocking. "You had your chance." Crash. Logan's men started smashing the boarded windows. Eric raised his pistol. "Here we go." Scott fired first, shattering the silence of the night. One of Logan's men dropped instantly. Logan and the others dove for cover. "You're dead, Scott." More gunfire erupted. Alex took position behind an overturned desk and fired back, forcing Logan's group to retreat behind an old fire truck. But then, a new sound. Deep, guttural growls. The gunfire had attracted zombies. And a lot of them. Scott cursed under his breath. "We need to get out of here, now." Eric looked toward the back door. "Exit's clear, for now." Alex grabbed Dana's hand, leading her and Katie toward the back. Scott covered their retreat, unloading bullets at both Logan's crew and the incoming undead. As they reached the door, Alex looked back one last time. Logan was still fighting, but the zombies were closing in. His arrogant smirk had turned into sheer terror. Alex turned away. Logan's screams didn't last long. On the run again. They ran until their lungs burned. By the time they stopped, the fire station was far behind. Eric leaned against a wall, panting. "That was too close." Scott nodded. "Yeah. But at least that bastard's gone." Dana hugged Katie tightly, whispering, "It's over now." Alex wasn't so sure. Because in this world, the horror never truly ended. The city was behind them now. Alex, Scott, Dana, Eric, and little Katie had barely escaped with their lives. The fire station was lost, Logan was dead, and the streets were no safer than before. The group had been walking for hours, following an abandoned highway leading toward the countryside. The further they got from the city, the quieter it became. No more gunfire. No more distant screams. Just the wind rustling through the dead world. Scott adjusted Katie in his arms. "She's exhausted. We need to stop soon." Dana wiped sweat from her forehead. "I think I see something up ahead." Alex squinted. A farmhouse stood in the distance, old but sturdy, surrounded by open fields. There were no signs of movement. No undead wandering nearby. Eric chuckled dryly. Looks almost peaceful. Alex wasn't convinced. Let's check it out first. Stay quiet. The final test. They approached carefully, weapons drawn. The front door was unlocked. Inside, dust covered every surface, but there were no signs of struggle. No bodies. No blood. It was as if the people who lived there had simply vanished. Scott searched the kitchen. Canned food. Water. Even a radio. Dana ran her fingers over a family photo left behind. Whoever lived here must have left in a hurry. Eric tested the radio, turning the dial. Static. Then, if anyone can hear this, safe zone, north of the river, coordinates. The voice crackled and faded. Alex's heart pounded. A safe zone. Did you hear that? Eric asked. Scott nodded. It's a long shot, but it's something. Dana hesitated. But what if it's another trap? We've seen what people are capable of. Alex took a deep breath. We don't have much of a choice. Staying here forever isn't an option. A final nightmare. Just as hope started to build, Katie screamed. A zombie stumbled out from the hallway, fast and hungry. Scott yanked Katie away as it lunged. Alex fired, bang, the zombie's head snapped back, but it kept coming. Eric fired another shot. This time, the creature collapsed. The echoes of the gunfire faded, but they all knew what it meant. More were coming. Dana's face paled. We need to go. Now. Outside, shadows were already moving in the trees. The undead were coming, drawn by the noise. Alex tightened his grip on his gun. To the truck, now! The final choice. The farmhouse had an old pickup truck out back. Scott threw the door open. Keys, 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 yes. He turned the ignition. The truck rumbled to life. Alex, Dana, and Eric jumped in. Katie clung to Dana, eyes wide with fear. Zombies poured from the treeline. Dozens of them. Eric rolled down his window and fired into the horde. Go! Scott slammed the gas pedal. The truck roared forward, plowing through the oncoming undead. Limbs crunched under tires. Hands slapped against the sides. But they didn't stop. They didn't look back. The road ahead. The highway stretched endlessly before them. Dana held Katie close. We made it. Eric exhaled. Barely. Alex stared at the road ahead. We're not safe yet. But if that radio transmission is real, we might have a chance. Scott gripped the wheel. Then let's find out. As the sun began to rise, they drove toward the unknown. Toward either salvation. Or another nightmare. The end, or just the beginning.